Hello and welcome to week 9 in the psychology of adulthood. And last chapter we talked about midlife. And throughout the time I was recording that particular video, I wanted to talk about midlife crisis. But I knew that I had given that particular topic its whole chapter. Now, midlife is purportedly not only the largest part of our life, according to Erickson, of generativity when we're doing all of the things that we want to do. But at some point in midlife, and I'm going to talk first about midlife, then we'll talk about midlife type events. But in midlife is when we first start to experience the realities of our aging. Usually, we recognize that our bodies are aging, and in some ways, those physiological realities awaken us to the reality. It's not that we've been ignoring it, it's not that we don't know about it, and young people are perfectly aware of the fact that their lives will end. But when you start aging physically and experiencing those realities, then there's a heightened awareness that you only have so much time left. Now, it may be decades, but nonetheless, it seems for many individuals to kind of throw a switch. Now, here's where I'll talk about the term crisis. When you think about a midlife crisis, what I want you to think about is actually James Marcia's theory. So here's James Marcia's theory. We have these 4 blocks that identify a potential status in which part of our identity would be in. And within this theory, the term crisis referred to exploration. I'm looking at the options. It could have emotional consequences. We do understand that some individuals can go into an identity crisis, and because of the thing that they're questioning or looking at is very substantive, those individuals may have some emotional fallout from that. But in truth, the underlying quality is I'm looking at the options related to that particular aspect of my identity. Now, events can happen in our lives that I would refer to as crisis events. They could be an illness, the death of somebody, a close call for yourself, a change in, a change in your plans. You didn't get into that school, or you didn't make it into that profession, or the job ended, depending on how old you are, and all the ways in which we can come to a place in which we are kind of fundamentally looking at what are we going to do next. So for myself, moving into retirement from full-time work was a somewhat self-imposed crisis that now, not that I wasn't thinking about it before, but now that I'm there, redefining who I am as an individual when that full-time job occupied such a huge part of my identity. How do I restructure my identity from this point forward with lots of years still to contribute? And that's the sort of questing that can happen. And I'm fortunate that I've been teaching these classes for a long time, because it actually gave me the opportunity to think about these things for a long time and, kind of preempt and prepare for the new identity that I would adopt once I was not teaching full time. So teaching part time is definitely still a part of it, but not as much as it used to be. So at any point in life, and I'm past midlife, by the way, so even on the other side of that that sort of like halfway line. I have long been experiencing my aging, and yet here's another crisis. You may have experienced all kinds of different crises that uh, caused you to look at the options in regard to a piece of your identity. So let's take a look at a midlife crisis and relate it to Marcia's theory. So we're back looking under here. For one thing, the reason why we bring this up in midlife is because we can generally assume that there are a lot of areas that are in identity achievement. This is the era of identity achievement. You got the job, you got the family, the house, and all that stuff. We're looking at 40s or whatnot. Something like that. So presumably in the most predictable averageness of lifespan accomplishments, you got a lot of identity achievement going on here. Yet something is itching. You get an itch. Let's say first you might be questioning, am I on the right path? I've made this commitment to this career. I've made this commitment to this family. I've made this commitment to where I'm living. I've made this commitment to this or that. Is that really what I want? Now I'm looking at, remember, keep that in mind. This is a little bit maybe more fundamental when we're talking about this age, because I know I don't have that much time. If I'm going to make a change in my career, for example, I might have to start working at that now. And that brings a particular certain pressure to act. And for some people, if that's out of control, they can act impulsively. We hear about those stories. Rare, but nonetheless still part of our culture, of the individual who reached midlife, was unsatisfied with everything, and divorced, bought a sports car, dated someone way younger than them, those kinds of things. These kinds of like return to childhood or return to young adulthood or whatever, those kinds of things. That could be a dramatic upheaval in that family, and certainly you may have some experiences with people who have done that and those consequences for those individuals' behavior. But even with that in mind, there are individuals who will approach this time in their life, and it's a time of reevaluation. And maybe they will conclude, after they've thought about it again, that yes, I am on the path that I want. And that becomes strengthened. Or they may say, I think I want a different path, and I'm going to have to start acting on that now. That would move some of those identity achievement areas of their identity into moratorium. At the same time, the person may become aware of things that have been on the back burner. Always wanted to learn the guitar. Well, I better start now, and now maybe I'm financially able to do that, or maybe I, there's life circumstances where the kids are more independent and I have more time after work to be able to work on a hobby. So maybe now that thing that's always been on the back burner, maybe now is the time to do it. In addition, we may also look at those things that are foreclosed. Anything that we felt that we've been unable to do, anything that we're sort of stuck in. Let's say, well, I've been on that volunteer committee for 20 years, and I think I'm just going to stop doing that. I'm going to no longer do that. Certainly, what we see in this sort of identity thing in midlife is, remember, there's always other people in our family that are different stages of their lives. So when parents reach midlife, their children may be becoming increasingly independent. And you might find parents being more than willing to be able to let go of some of those responsibilities. Like, this is the last load of my kids' laundry I will ever do. I'm not doing it anymore, and I'm going to no longer feel that I'm foreclosed into that role. And the readiness of the child to experience that is a dynamic that can result. There's also another dynamic that happens. You probably heard about empty nest syndrome. Now, empty nest, technically speaking, is um, disharmony between mom and dad when the kids become independent. Often arises because of an identity crisis. When an individual, their achieved identity has been apparent, huge part, and it should be, but as they approach losing that job, essentially losing the job of being a parent because you were successful, and the kids are often going. That's We're supposed to work ourselves out of a job, right? But yet, if you don't have a new identity to adopt, you can feel lost. And that's on a continuum. Some people can feel lost and depressed, and then they decide they're going to make some changes, and they go back to school, or they get a hobby, or maybe they go to work, or maybe they make a change. It's time. It's me time now. They make that sort of change. Others, at the other most dysfunctional way, they may act in ways to try and keep their children from being totally independent. They try to keep them attached to them, and that can become problematic. And it can become problematic for a number of ways. You can have conflict that exists between the child who's trying to individuate and move out on their own and the parents pulling back. But it can also be that the child that's moving on their own and is scared and willfully comes back and wants to stay in the nest, and that can be the failure to launch sort of situation where the parent is struggling with their own feelings of a change in their dynamic, their relationship with their children, while their children struggle out there so much that they come back. And notwithstanding, as my wife and I watch our kids try to navigate the world right now, it is a different world than when I entered into. It's a more expensive world, and I think it's a lot harder to survive without having a group of people living together. I moved into my own apartment fairly early and had enough money. And that's an extreme challenge, even here in Maine, even with my one of my children, well, three of our kids collectively living local, struggling with housing, struggling with meeting basic needs, and despite the fact that they're working. And so there is some socioeconomic challenges that go along with that. Now back to midlife. So all this is going on. So an individual may take this opportunity for personal growth. They may, in fact, move aspects of their identity achievement into moratorium, identity diffusion into moratorium, and identity foreclosure issues into moratorium, and they return to a state, at least in terms of identity status, that looks an awful lot like adolescence. Lots of things up in the air. Being able to manage that is one of the tasks of generativity. So this is not an abnormal thing. Sometimes it's a letting go, sometimes it's a getting up and doing something. It's those dynamics, and having helpful people around you and reaching out for assistance, even professional assistance on dealing with this, is certainly well within normal to be able to do that. Okay, so in the discussion, I'm asking you to talk about crisis events. For some of you, you may have had midlife, right? Or you're right around 40, a little, that you might be approaching that. What are your thoughts on that? You might look at events that happen in your life the divorce of your parents or the loss of a job or your own divorce or anything, and those kinds of pathways that parted and where you had to take an opportunity to redefine yourself. And how did that go? Did you get some serendipity in there? I know where this is going to go. You're going to have some all over, like uh, to the point of sometimes um, something that was very painful actually revealed a new course in your life, and that's always an interesting thing to hear about. So a free discussion on that. The quiz, I'm asking you to essentially, looking at it now, to identify a specific one and write about it in detail. How did it affect your identity, behavior, and any other aspects of your life? So I'm reading my notes and I was a little off on the discussion. I'm actually asking you experience with the social expectations. I just quickly read midlife, the social expectations of midlife. Same thing. What are I was sort of touching on the idea about this midlife crisis when I wrote that, now that I'm reviewing it here in my head. Um, when I wrote that, it was about the mystique of midlife, about the crisis, that like the person I was talking about, divorced, new job, sports card, girlfriend named Bambi, whatever. And that kind of explosive sort of letting go versus the idea of midlife events, where we're refining our identity, natural process. In that, you can share your particular experiences of that, but I'm also going to be looking for that in the quiz. So they are a little different, but they should probably build on each other. So sorry about that little snafu there. All right, so that's what we have for week 9 in the psychology of adulthood. Look forward to seeing your stuff online and take care.